The recently unsealed indictment against former President Donald Trump by Jack Smith has been getting a lot of attention these past couple of days, as well it should. But there's another news story about Donald Trump and what he did, or in some cases didn't, or almost didn't do while he was president, that I also think deserves a few minutes of conversation. This is from E&E News by Scott Waldman and Thomas Frank. In the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, former President Donald Trump has blasted the Biden administration for its handling of the disaster, going so far as to accuse Democratic leaders of ignoring the needs of Republican storm victims. But a review of Trump's record by Politico's E&E News and interviews with two former Trump White House officials show that the former president was flagrantly partisan at times in response to disasters, and on at least 3 occasions hesitated to give disaster aid to areas he considered politically hostile or ordered special treatment for pro-Trump states. I want to pause right here to say, of course, I'm not expecting any of you to be surprised by this. I'm not surprised by it either, but the details of it, I think, are worth knowing and worth talking about. Mark Harvey, who was Trump's senior director for resilience policy on the National Security Council staff, told E&E News on Wednesday that Trump initially refused to approve disaster aid for California after deadly wildfires in 2018 because of the state's Democratic leanings. But Harvey said Trump changed his mind after Harvey pulled voting results to show him that heavily damaged Orange County, California, had more Trump supporters than the entire state of Iowa, Harvey said. We went as far as looking up how many votes he got in those impacted areas to show him these are people who voted for you, said Harvey, who recently endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris alongside more than 100 other Republican former national security officials. And the article goes on to talk about how when Florida was in need of federal disaster relief, Trump couldn't approve that fast enough. Those are his people. Florida is a red state. They got everything they wanted. Governor DeSantis got everything he wanted. Trump even told FEMA, which he was entitled to do. It's part of the authority of the president. The president is allowed to do this. And Trump did this. He told FEMA to pay a higher percentage of the costs than they ordinarily would to make sure that Florida got everything that they needed to recover from their disaster and that the federal government paid 100% of the bill. The state and local agencies in Florida didn't have to worry about it. The federal government took care of it all. That's how Trump took care of Florida, whereas he had to be talked into approving disaster relief for California because of the wildfires. And like I said, none of this should be surprising to any of us. This is who Trump is, but it never hurts to have a reminder, especially a specific, concrete reminder, written in black and white from the mouth of someone who was there, who worked for Trump, of what kind of a man he is, what kind of a president he was, and therefore what kind of a president we can expect him to be if he wins the election that is coming up in just about a month from now. And it's especially rich in the context of Hurricane Helene and the lies that Trump has told over the past several days about how President Biden and Vice President Harris are supposedly missing in action, and they're neglecting the people in the areas in the Southeast that were hit the hardest by Hurricane Helene, the towns in the Carolinas that were horribly flooded, and the death tolls in those areas, and in Georgia and Tennessee, where it's a tragedy. It's a humanitarian crisis. And of course, the federal government should be there to help those people. And the federal government is there to help those people. But Donald Trump has been saying, well, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, he couldn't get Biden on the phone, which was a lie that Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, who, by the way, is a Republican, corrected. I think he actually corrected it before Trump said it. Trump said, well, Brian Kemp can't get Biden on the phone. And that was like the day after Brian Kemp gave a press conference where he said that actually Biden had called him and said, what do you need? Tell me what you need and it's yours, right? Biden was right there on the phone coordinating the federal response to Hurricane Helene and saying, whatever you need, just call me. You don't even have to go through the formal federal process. If there's something you need right now, you have my number. Call me. The president of the United States will make sure that it gets done. That's what Joe Biden was doing. To a Republican governor in a red state, hopefully about to become a blue state, but in a red state. Actually, I think it was a blue state last time, wasn't it? For Biden. It did go for Biden in 2020. But anyway, traditionally, in recent history, it's been a red state. Biden didn't care. I don't think it even, I honestly don't, I can criticize Joe Biden about a bunch of stuff. I don't think it even entered Joe Biden's mind. Well, gee, do I really want to give FEMA money to Georgia? I don't know. They might not vote for Harris this time. They're not a very reliable Democratic state. Maybe I'd better slow walk this. I don't think it ever even occurred to Biden to do that. Just as, and not saying that Joe Biden is some kind of saint, it wouldn't occur to most people to treat disaster relief like that, to treat disaster relief as a partisan issue. One of the only people in the country that it would occur to is Donald Trump. And he's the guy who accused President Biden of it, saying, well, they're not taking care of the people down here because they know that these aren't Democrat voters. These are Republican voters, so they're missing in action. It was a lie. It didn't happen. It's not happening. He criticized Biden and Harris for not visiting one of the disaster areas earlier. And the reason for that, again, coming straight from Biden's office, is he didn't want to go down and visit an active disaster area at a time and in a way that would disrupt the relief and recovery efforts. They're still looking for people down there. They're still trying to help people. There's still an active recovery effort going on. And the president said, yes, I want to go down there and see what's going on. I want to see the people, but I don't want to do it in a way that will hinder those efforts, because those efforts are the most important thing. That's not the story Trump is telling his people. That's not the story Trump's surrogates and mouthpieces are telling people. They're inventing this fiction, as they nearly always do, that Biden it's a Republican heavy area, so Biden doesn't care. Harris doesn't care. She's willing to let those people drown. Kamala Harris is willing to let all those people drown. She'd like it better if they were all dead. Then they wouldn't be able to vote against her. That's the story that Trump is telling. And as we know, especially since Trump became the figurehead of the party, when a Republican makes an accusation, 9 times out of 10, they're actually making a confession. And when Donald Trump characterizes his political opponents, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, as being these sorts of, they're so hyper-partisan that they don't even want to extend federal disaster relief to areas that are majority Republican. When he accuses the other side of doing that, what that tells you is that's how he sees it. And we're not just arguing by analogy there. And we're not just saying, well, that's what they always do, so this is what he's doing now. We have a historical record based on testimony from people who were there, who worked for Trump in Trump's White House, who were in the room with him, who had conversations with him. We know, we have a record that tells us that that is exactly how Trump handled disaster relief when he was the president. And it's not just the hypocrisy of Trump saying, well, Biden doesn't care about the South because it's not majority Democrat, or Biden is depriving these people of disaster relief or whatever. It's not just that. Something struck me about the specificity of the story that I just quoted you from that article about Trump being reluctant to approve disaster relief for California in the aftermath of wildfires. How many times over the last 4 years have we heard Donald Trump, more recently J.D. Vance, any number of surrogates and spokespeople for the Trump campaign accuse the Democrats of letting some city burn to the ground because allegedly protesters, radical leftists, anarchists had overrun the streets and taken over the city, and they burned it down. They burned Minneapolis to the ground, and Governor Tim Walz just sat back and let them do it. Or Joe Biden just sat back and let them do it. Or Kamala Harris just sat back and left them do it. They burned Minneapolis to the ground. I have friends who live in Minneapolis who would be incredibly surprised to learn that their city was burned to the ground a few years ago. I don't think they heard that news. Or Seattle, or Portland, or San Francisco, or name the city that this has been said about. Those liberals, those leftists, those activists, those protesters, they burned the city to the ground, and the Democratic governors or the Democratic representatives, they were powerless to stop it, or they didn't want to stop it. They liked it. They let them burn to the ground. And now we have this story, and it is impossible for me not to make that connection. While Donald Trump has been accusing Democrats of allowing cities to burn down, which never happened, in reality, while he was president, maybe he didn't let California burn down because the disaster relief was solicited after the wildfires had kind of begun to subside, and the relief and rebuilding process was underway, and they needed federal money to help with that, and that's what that request was about. He didn't actively, literally let California burn down, but he had to be talked in to approving federal money to help with the relief efforts after the wildfires had ravaged California in 2018. So the truth is, it's not that Democratic leaders are letting cities burn. It's that Donald Trump was willing, metaphorically speaking, to let California burn because he doesn't think there are that many people who like him there. And Trump only helps people that like him. Trump only likes people that like him, and he only wants to help people who like him. And there's a paragraph to that effect in this E&E News story. Harvey, the former Trump special assistant, remembers trying to push Trump to get money out the door to Puerto Rico. It was very much a business deal, like, this is a lot of money. What are we getting in return for it? Harvey said. There was still just a whole lot of stall, don't give them what they need yet. It just goes into this pattern of, we're not awarding that. Those aren't my people. That general sense of, I am here to help my people, and those aren't my people, so I don't have a responsibility to help. Trump's approach to Puerto Rico stands in contrast to how he responded to a separate disaster in Alabama, where he won 63% of the vote in 2016. In early 2019, days after tornadoes killed 23 people in Alabama, Trump wrote on Twitter, FEMA has been told directly by me to give the A+ treatment to the great state of Alabama and the wonderful people who have been so devastated by the tornadoes. There is no indication that FEMA gave special treatment to Alabama. I mean, this story is just like a greatest hits of all of the things wrong with Donald Trump as a human being and as a president. He doesn't want to help California because there's people there that don't like him, and he doesn't view that as his people. He is reluctant to help Puerto Rico for the same reason. And also, he probably doesn't know that Puerto Rico is part of the United States. And also, he's super racist. And those are brown people down there in Puerto Rico. Why should we pay for that? And they're poor. And come on, what are we going to get for it? And that's the other part. It's Donald Trump and his partisanship and his racism and his opportunism and his self-interest, his toxic, all-consuming self-interest. And it's also this bullshit that, we need to run the government like a business. What does he say in that quote? Well, what are we going to get for this? This is a lot of money to give to Puerto Rico. What are we going to get for this? He sees it all as a transaction. Everything's a business deal for him. Everything, and it's ironic because in reality, outside of his own fantasies, he sucks at business. He's a terrible businessman. He's a terrible negotiator. He tells people, I'm great at making deals. He sucks at it. He's really bad at it. But he has this Republican mindset. Run the government like a business. Run the government like a profit-making enterprise. Even though that's not what government is or should be. Government exists to serve the will of the people and to look out for the interests of the people, not to make anybody any fucking money. That's not what government is for. But in Donald Trump's mind, and in the minds of most Republicans, hey, that's a valid concern. Disaster relief to Puerto Rico? Well, what are we going to get for that? We ever going to get that back? But for Alabama, whatever they want. He says on Twitter, oh, I gave them the A+ treatment. Because again, in his mindset, this is like a tiered thing. Well, Alabama, there's a lot of Republicans down there. Did you see that? They voted for me 63% last time. They get the luxury package. In his mind, disaster relief has, well, there's just the basic package where, sure, we'll help you rebuild your house or yada, yada, yada. Then if I really like you, if I really want to reward you and make you feel special and let you know that you're one of my people, you get the deluxe package. You get the luxury package. It's like you don't just get the concert tickets. You get the backstage passes. You get the entry into the private after party. You get all of the amenities that other people are going to have to pay extra for, but I'll hook you up because you're one of my people. That's how Donald Trump views disaster relief. And I'm not saying that he as president or anybody who would have been in that situation as president should not have taken care of those people in Alabama. Of course he should have. And of course he did the right thing by doing it, but he did the right thing for the wrong reason. And he framed it in a way to make it seem like he was favoring a part of the country that supports him more than other parts of the country that might not support him in the same percentage of numbers. And that's the problem. And that it's the problem not only with how he executed the office of president, it's a problem with his mindset, with his worldview. I am the furthest thing you could possibly be from a Republican, from a conservative. I am progressive. I am a Democrat. I already voted for Harrison Walz in my mail-in ballot, along with every other goddamn Democrat I could find on that ballot. But if I were president, heaven help us, if I were president, and there was a natural disaster in Alabama, or Arkansas, or Georgia, or Tennessee, or Oklahoma, or even fucking Texas, name the reddest red state you can find. If I'm the president of the United States, and they need disaster relief if they get hit by a hurricane or a flood or a tornado or whatever, and I have the power to help them, I'm going to help them. Because people who have lost their homes due to a natural disaster deserve help. State and local agencies who are facing disasters that have overwhelmed their resources deserve help, deserve support. That's what FEMA exists to do. That's the entire purpose behind it. It is the federal agency that coordinates federal response to help out with disasters when the local and the state agencies are completely overwhelmed and they cannot live up to their responsibilities because the damage is too great. The number of victims is too great. The cost of rebuilding is too great. That's when the federal government comes in and says, don't worry about it. We've got you. That's how it should work. There shouldn't be a premium package. An A+ treatment should not be possible. And it's not, like as it says in the end of that section that I read to you. FEMA didn't give special treatment to Alabama. They shouldn't give special treatment to anybody. They should help whoever needs help. That's how it should work. That's how it does work when it works properly. It doesn't always work that way. If we remember the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, it doesn't always work that way. But that's the way it's, by the way, what party was the president? Was George W. Bush, right? Was he a Democrat? Refresh my memory. Oh, he was a Republican who was in charge when they fucked up the disaster relief to Hurricane Katrina? Interesting. Anyway, that's how it's supposed to work. It's not about partisanship. It's not about party affiliation. It's not about which state voted for which candidate last time and what number. That's not what it's about. And it's not a transaction. It's not, well, gee, Alabama, gee, Florida, gee, California, whatever. We'd love to help you out. We'd love to help you rebuild your homes and your schools and repave your roads. We'd love, hey, we'd love, and make all of you people whole who have lost everything. We'd love to help you out, but what are you going to do for us? I mean, like, we'd love to give you this money, but like, I mean, how are you going to pay this back? What do we get out of it? That's not how it's supposed to work. That's how it works in Donald Trump's mind. That's how everything works in Donald Trump's mind. Everything from disaster relief to diplomacy to personal relationships, even with your own family. I have absolutely no doubt. 100% transactional, zero sum. I give, you give. And if I give you something and don't get anything in return, then somehow I'm a sucker. I'm diminished. You've taken me for something. That's how Donald Trump sees it. If you give somebody something and you don't get anything from them in return, you're a sucker. You're a loser. You've been taken for a ride. You've been taken advantage of. They've made a fool out of you. Those people in California who wanted him to give disaster funds to help out after the wildfires, well, they just wanted to make fools of him. They wanted to take his money. He thinks of it as his money because he was the president and he was in charge of the federal government, and it was federal funds that had been allocated for disaster relief. And he was in charge of deciding when they go out and when they don't. So it was his money. They wanted to take his money. Why should Donald Trump give them his money? They don't like him. Do you want this guy to be president again? I don't. November 5th, Election Day. Let's make sure he's not president. Ever again. Elect Kamala Harris and prevent another Trump presidency. That's what I call disaster relief.